Welcome back, everybody, to the second episode of the NCAA Next Up series, where we start the collegiate careers of the stars of tomorrow. In the introduction episode, we went over a lot of the rosters of some of these teams towards the top of the polls, and today we'll be covering the first 3 weeks of the 2022 college football season as we finally get to see what all of these guys are made of. We've been hyping some of these prospects up for a little while now. We've been really looking at these conferences and who we expect to win based on the preseason polls. And we're now going to start to get some answers to those questions. We're going to see which teams are for real and which teams were overrated. So we're going to be doing weeks 1, 2, and 3 today. Week 1 does not have a large slate of games, but there are a number of big-time matchups, particularly amongst teams in the loaded SEC conference, who has 7 of the top 9 teams in the AP preseason poll. We're going to start things off in Oxford, Mississippi, as the Ole Miss Rebels host the University of Georgia. The Bulldogs are the defending runners-up last year after losing in the national championship to the Minnesota Golden Gophers. This Georgia team enters the season with sky-high expectations. They're the number 1 ranked team in the country, led by senior quarterback Clyde Williamson, who is expected to be the top quarterback off the board in this year's upcoming draft. It was pretty easy to tell early on that this Georgia offense is special. Clyde Williamson has an unbelievable arm, and Georgia's offense made it look effortless throughout the day, winning this one by the final score of 62-17. Ole Miss is a talented football team, but they got absolutely throttled by Georgia, and it doesn't get any easier for Ole Miss, who has to go up against Texas this upcoming week. Big win for the Bulldogs as we go to their interdivision rivals, the South Carolina Gamecocks, who are participating in the Chick-fil-A Classic game in Atlanta, Georgia, against the Boston College Eagles. I think this could be a pretty exciting game, and sure enough, it went down to the wire. South Carolina started off quick with a nice touchdown pass from Marco Prince over to the senior Bryson Smith, who looks to be a first-round pick in this year's draft. Boston College answered with a touchdown of their own, a great throw by senior quarterback Rodolphe Rousseau, who suffered a mild concussion on the next drive and would be out for the rest of the game. The backup quarterback, Garland Nobles, came in and dominated, leading Boston College to the upset victory, 35-32 over the Gamecocks. Nobles looked phenomenal throwing the football here, the talented lefty. The regular starter, Rodolphe Rousseau, should be back next week for Boston College. And then the game of the week. Number 7, Louisiana State travels down to Austin to take on the number 4 ranked Texas, who of course has just moved into the SEC. Heisman favorite running back Ronnie DeRugi really struggled early on for the Tigers. Texas is one of the best front sevens in the country, and they showed that early and often. As for the Longhorns, their offense was quite impressive. Sophomore quarterback Benedict Sparrow had a great game, including this beautiful touchdown to Vashan Kodali. Running back Amadeo Kalu was able to find the end zone. And then look at this unbelievable Hail Mary to end the first half. One of 2 touchdowns scored by the tight end Dax Boss, as Texas would win the game handedly, but not without sacrifice. One of their star receivers, Tyrese Barracon, broke his hand on this ridiculous catch. As you can see right here, his left hand hits the ground awkwardly. He is expected to miss most of the rest of the regular season, a huge loss for the Longhorns. They're going to need Deaton Washington to step up, along with Vachan Kodali, who's now going to have a more prominent role on the outside. Nice win here for the Longhorns, 45-21. As we look at some of the other scores around the country, Vanderbilt beat Texas Tech pretty handedly, which I guess just shows how good the SEC is. Colorado State upset Colorado 28-27. South Alabama and Bowling Green are both favorites in their conferences, and South Alabama won by a lot, 31-6. The Arkansas Razorbacks were upset by Ball State, 28-21. Not a great start to the year for the Razorbacks, and Utah barely sweeps away against their rivals, the Utah State Aggies, 17-14. Yeah, pretty small slate of games here in week 1. The next 2 weeks are going to have a lot more games for us to go over. This was a very short week, but normally the first week in college football, there really aren't that many games. There's a really fun slate here in week 2. Before that, I do want to take a quick look at the players of the week. As I had hinted earlier, Clyde Williamson won it on offense, and then defensively it was Utah corner Brandon Garrett, who picked off 2 passes in Utah's win against Utah State. There weren't many changes in the AP Top 25 as expected. Texas jumped Oklahoma and Clemson. They are now number 2 after their big win against LSU. The Tigers ended up falling to the number 14 spot in the nation. And then Missouri leapfrogs South Carolina, who lost their first game to Boston College. The Tigers now are in the top 25. They go up against Alabama this week. Not easy. So as we go through the games, the very first game we're going to talk about is our national game of the week. Number 10, Pitt heads out to Rocky Top to take on the number 15th ranked Tennessee Volunteers. The ACC has a lot of expectations, and Pitt is the second highest ranked team in that conference. Tennessee also have some big expectations. Pitt started this game off pretty strong. You senior quarterback Jonah Molawire with a great throw in the end zone. Pitt was up by 2 scores going into halftime, but Tennessee responded well. Sophomore quarterback Benjamin McKenzie threw 4 touchdowns, including that one to true freshman Skeeter Darlington. McKenzie had a few really impressive runs as well in this game, and then late he would find his senior tight end Kayvon Chase in the back of the end zone for the go-ahead touchdown. The Vols would get the win 35-28 against the Pitt Panthers. The Penn State Nittany Lions opened their season as the favorites in the Big Ten Conference, and they start off here at home at Beaver Stadium against the Virginia Cavaliers, but this one did not go as Penn State had expected. Virginia really played well early in this game, and they ended up hanging on for a big upset, 31-24. Virginia expected to be in the top 25 next week. Speaking of highly ranked Big Ten opponents, Iowa heads out to Fresno State to take on the 20th ranked Bulldogs. Fresno State with big expectations, and they started their season off strong, beating the Hawkeyes with a great performance from senior running back Alec Bostic. 33-24 your final. Number 14 LSU, coming off their first loss of the year, heads to Kentucky to face off against the Wildcats. And it was tough sledding right from the start for LSU. Starting quarterback Thomas Turamenko completed just 3 of his 23 passing attempts. Running back Ronnie DeRugi had another pretty quiet game for his standards. And then on the other side, junior quarterback Isaiah Gordon was very impressive as the Wildcats won 47-3. LSU appears to have been overrated in the preseason polls. They look really, really bad. I have a hard time thinking they'll stay in the top 25 after this horrible loss. Number 22, Syracuse starts their season at home in the Carrier Dome against the University of Miami of Ohio. This was a great game that went into overtime. Miami would end up kicking a field goal, taking a 3-point lead. Syracuse would have it late. On a 4th down, they elected to go for it rather than go for the tie. Romano Fargnoli, the Heisman candidate, would be intercepted in the end zone, and the Miami of Ohio Warhawks get the win 41-38. Speaking of upsets involving teams named Miami, the Miami Hurricanes start their year ranking number 17 against the University of South Florida Bulls, and Miami was very surprised to see how impressive sophomore quarterback Donovan Ferguson was for USF. Ferguson's one of the best Group 5 quarterbacks in the country. He had the throw of maybe the season, this unbelievable pass for a touchdown, and then on the other side, Miami's starting quarterback Scooter Young was intercepted 3 times as South Florida gets the win 42-24. Missouri heads to Alabama here in Tuscaloosa as they are set to take on the number 5 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. Starting quarterback Shiloh McDuff got injured on the first drive of the game for Missouri, and that's pretty much all she wrote. Bryson Byrne threw 3 touchdowns for the Crimson Tide, all 3 of which were caught by sophomore sensation Jaden Wilson Miller, and the Tide won easily, 42-10 over Missouri. Number 3, Oklahoma starts their season on the road against their rivals, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska made this game competitive, but senior quarterback Masaru Lee is just a little bit too good. Lee ended up throwing for 6 touchdowns today en route to a 44-24 victory for the Sooners. Lee's stock certainly on the rise. As of now, he looks like a day 2 NFL prospect. In the Big House, West Virginia faces off against the number 21 ranked Michigan Wolverines in what ended up being one of the most exciting games of the week. This was a phenomenal matchup. West Virginia led late. However, Michigan responded with a beautiful pass from Bartholomew Blunt into the hands of T.K. Thomas. And then not too long later, Michigan would score a touchdown to take the lead. That's Hollis Francois with the score. West Virginia would get the ball late with a great run from Jose Alvaro. And then with 30 seconds to go, Alvaro fakes the handoff, takes a shot deep for the end zone, and it would be caught for a touchdown by Lamar Rogers. The Mountaineers upset Michigan 35-32. And then the final game of Week 2, number 12 Florida State against Notre Dame. The Irish right on the edge of being ranked, led by possible first-round quarterback Sosa Hupy, who had a great game on the ground, but Hupy only completed 6 of his 12 passes. The Fighting Irish did not really throw the ball a lot. As for FSU, the name to watch here Garrett Rodriguez, the sophomore, caught 10 passes for 163 yards and 3 touchdowns. Even when the starting quarterback Jacob King got injured, that did not stop Rodriguez from dominating, leading FSU to the win, 31-27. Looking at some other notable games with the top 25, the defending champion Minnesota Golden Gophers beat Colorado 35-0. UCLA hops into the top 25, beating Maryland. Clemson only wins by 16 against an FCS opponent. Baylor beats NC State 23-13. Georgia beats Georgia State pretty easily. Cal barely gets by FCS West. Texas A&M barely gets by San Diego State. Texas beats Ole Miss. Ohio State only beats Arizona State by 7. UNC scores 54 on New Mexico State. And then Auburn and Purdue beat their FCS opponents pretty handedly. Some other notable results include Boston College dominating Nevada 45-7. BYU losing to FCS Midwest 27-18. Not a great start to the year for the Cougars. Utah scores 52 against Stanford. Cincinnati only beats their FCS opponent by 7. South Carolina loses their second game of the year, getting manhandled by Georgia Tech 38-17. Not a great start to the Gamecocks. Ohio upsets Wisconsin, and then Louisville barely edges out Old Dominion in a triple overtime thriller. USC, meanwhile, scores 54 as they beat Northwestern by a lot, and Florida hops into the top 25, beating Arkansas by 7. Boise State beats Michigan State by 12. So we do have some changes here. Not a whole lot in the top 10 other than Penn State dropping out with their loss to Virginia, who moves into the top 25. West Virginia also hops into the top 25 along with UCLA and Florida, with 4 teams dropping out. Those schools were Miami, Syracuse, Wisconsin, and Missouri. Miami and Missouri still receiving votes along with Rice, Arizona, and Oregon. We do have some changes in the Heisman watch. Clyde Williamson and Benedict Sparrow have entered the mix, with the top 3 holding to form. Brian Watson won Defensive Player of the Week, the Boise State corner, with 2 interceptions, and UNC QB Graham Fisher won the Offensive Player of the Week. Let's get into Week 3, and just a quick little spoiler. Week 3 was absolutely drunk. There were some very, very odd results here as we start with number 25 Florida against the number 3 Oklahoma Sooners in Norman, Oklahoma. Oklahoma's quarterback Masaru Lee had an unbelievable first performance, and he's looking to do so again. Florida running back Elijah Bryant had a great performance today, scoring 3 touchdowns. He was very effective for the Gators, but that was not enough to stop the talented senior quarterback Masaru Lee, who continues his great start to the season, throwing for 4 touchdowns. This time it was Bryce Berry III who led the Oklahoma offense in receiving, as the Sooners would take this one home pretty comfortably, 44-28. Masaru Lee appears to be really, really good. His stock is definitely on the rise. I know it's only 2 games, and Oklahoma hasn't beaten anybody overly great, but the Sooners look really, really darn good. For our game of the week, number 20 West Virginia heads to Autzen Stadium to face off against the Oregon Ducks. The Ducks have not played yet this season. This is their first game of the year. And this Oregon offense looked unbelievably explosive early on. These receivers were so talented. Senior Deron Payton with over 200 yards in the air and a touchdown. Tyler Royal, another senior who looks to be a possible first or second round pick, added over 100 more yards of his own along with a score. The Oregon offense was just too much for West Virginia's defense to handle. Sophomore quarterback Barrett Cherokee was unbelievably impressive for the Ducks, not just as a passer, but also as a runner, with 5 all-purpose touchdowns. West Virginia's offense had a pretty good day for the most part, but they could not stop Barrett Cherokee. The Ducks ended up winning this game pretty convincingly by the score of 55-34. Cherokee ended up winning the NCAA Offensive Player of the Week, and very well deserved. Got to assume the Ducks are now going to enter the top 25, and West Virginia will probably drop out. UCLA heads to Champaign, Illinois to take on the Fighting Illini. UCLA just moved into the top 25 after their win last week against Maryland. This game ended up going into overtime. UCLA would take the lead with a nice kick by Malik Jackson. Illinois now with an opportunity to respond, and their running back was really, really impressive. He would march down the field in the first overtime period and eventually would win the game. Clancy with the game-winning touchdown as the Illini upset UCLA 41-38. Number 1, Georgia heads to South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 0-2 on the season. And early in this game, it looked like Georgia was going to get another easy win. Clyde Williamson was dominating again. However, late in the first half, he ended up getting sacked on this play right here and would miss the rest of the game with a minor injury. And from there, everything shifted. Marco Prince threw 3 touchdowns in the second half for South Carolina, 2 of which were caught by the superstar senior Bryson Smith, who had an unbelievable day for the Gamecocks. And we've got a shocker. South Carolina upsets number 1 Georgia 38-26. Pandemonium at the top of the NCAA rankings as Georgia falls. This game is very similar to the last one. Texas is number 2, taking on an underperforming Arkansas team who's lost their first 2 games of the year. The only difference between this game and the Georgia game is Georgia actually looked like they gave a damn. Arkansas would run it down Texas's throats the entire time. Starting running back Jeremy Martindale had nearly 50 carries for upwards of 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Senior quarterback Jackson Kayuma also had a very good day in the air for the Razorbacks with 2 touchdowns of his own. Just 2 weeks ago, these guys lost to Ball State, and now they clobber the Longhorns 35-10. The top 2 teams, Georgia and Texas, fall. There's nothing like a good old-fashioned rivalry. Kentucky and Louisville do not like each other at all, but this did not look like much of a two-way rivalry. Kentucky absolutely dominated this game, beating the Louisville Cardinals 45-10, and that's coming off their 47-3 victory last week against LSU. These Kentucky Wildcats look legit. Louisville starting quarterback Prince Parks has missed parts of both of Louisville's first games with injury, and I am a little bit concerned for senior wide receiver Matt Levine. I feel like he's been wasted a little bit with Louisville's quarterback carousel. Fresno State's coming off a huge win last week against Iowa. Now they host Western Michigan, and nothing went right for Fresno State at all today. Going into this game, I really thought the Bulldogs would have an opportunity to win 10 or 11 games, get a BCS bowl bid. But not only did Western Michigan completely dominate them, but starting running back Alec Bostic suffered a knee injury in the first quarter. It was feared to be serious. Thankfully, it's not. A massive break for the Bulldogs, but still not a good week for them. And then the final game of the day, LSU needs to get a win. They have lost their first 2 games. Now they face off against Missouri. The good news is that LSU's offense looked a lot better today. Ronnie DeRugi had his best game of the year, and Thomas Toromenko completed more than 16% of his passes. The problem is, Missouri's offense was just a little bit better. Shiloh McDuff had a phenomenal game in the air, and LSU's defense, who I was really excited about going into the year, has looked horrible so far this season, allowing at least 40 points in each of their first 3 losses. Missouri wins 47-45. Some other top 25 games include Auburn beating Mississippi State, Minnesota barely ekes out a win against Michigan State, Purdue beats Northwestern, Florida State beats Virginia Tech by a lot, Michigan beats Bowling Green by a lot, they're back in the top 25, Virginia and Penn State both beat their FCS opponents, Alabama rolls over Akron, Ohio State barely beats Northern Illinois, that's 2 very close wins for the Buckeyes, Tennessee beats Miami of Ohio pretty easily, Clemson shuts out North Texas 26-0, Iowa beats Iowa State for their first win of the year, Texas A&M's had a few close wins of their own, they only beat Vanderbilt by 10, Pitt barely ekes out a win against SMU, and Miami gets their first win of the season, beating Oklahoma State by 1, and then Cal dominates Utah 41-6. Some other notable games include UCF beating Wisconsin in overtime. The Badgers now 0-2. Nebraska puts up 58 on Temple. Arizona dominates Eastern Michigan. It's not that this game is significant, but Arizona as a team, they're really good. USC also looks really good. They won by a lot. Boise State loses 27-3 against FCS Midwest. Yikes. Notre Dame beats Georgia Tech for their first win of the year. Cincinnati's 2-0 with a nice win over TCU. Duke dominates Tulsa. I'm telling you, Duke's a real sleeper. Ole Miss barely beats FCS Northwest by just 5 points. A little bit too close there. And then Houston dominates BYU 54-21. Not a good start to the season for BYU. A lot of change in the top 25 polls with the top 2 teams losing. Oklahoma moves up to number 1 and everybody else pretty much moves up 2 spots. Georgia falls to number 11. Texas falls to number 14. I thought both of those teams fell a little bit harshly, but I get it. Oregon, Missouri, Illinois, South Carolina, and Miami all hop into the top 25. Fresno State, West Virginia, UCLA, LSU, and Florida have all dropped out. As for the Heisman watch, the top 2 remain the same. However, we have a new challenger. Oklahoma quarterback Masaru Lee has jumped all the way up to 3. I think he should be 1. He has been far and away the clear choice for the Heisman up to this point. And then Kiki Rodriguez III, the Auburn running back, jumps his own quarterback for 5th place. Players of the week are Tony Casey, the Georgia State corner with 3 interceptions, and Oregon QB Barrett Cherokee, who dominated against West Virginia. So before we end the episode, I want to go over a few teams in specific. I want to go over teams who exceeded my expectations today, who disappointed me today, and some more teams to watch. Nobody's stock for me is higher than Kentucky. They dominated in their first two games, blowing out LSU 47-3 and then Louisville 45-10. The fact that 1 and 2 South Carolina is in the top 25, but Kentucky isn't, is a travesty. And I really like South Carolina, who Kentucky will play against in the next episode. The Wildcats have a tough schedule coming up. I think it's kind of weak to put the number one team as a team whose stock is up, but Oklahoma's been very impressive so far. They've got some big games coming up, including Texas in the next episode, big-time rivalry. The main reason why I'm including Oklahoma here is I'm specifically higher on quarterback Masaru Lee, who has looked dominant through the first two games against respectable opponents in Nebraska and Florida. Neither of those teams are great. Oklahoma's going to have better teams on their schedule, but those are no pushovers. The final team here is Tennessee. I think the Vols have looked really good through their first two games. I thought next year would be the Vols' year to contend because they're one of the youngest teams in the country, but they beat Pitt and they dominated against a pretty good Miami of Ohio team. They've got a really tough stretch coming up against opponents like Georgia and Auburn in the next episode, followed by South Carolina and Alabama. I'm not convinced Tennessee will be able to compete for a national championship, but they have exceeded my expectations, and with Georgia losing a game already in the Southern Division, Tennessee could be the favorite if things continue to go well. As for teams who I'm lower on, obviously LSU is the easy choice. They started the year off 0-3. Ronnie DeRugi has not lived up to the Heisman hype. Thomas Toromenko has had some pretty bad performances, although he was better against Missouri, and the defense has been an utter disaster. It doesn't get any easier for them as in the next episode they play against Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, and Oklahoma. They have the real shot of going like 1-6 to start the year. Then it gets a lot easier, but still, brutal start for the Tigers, who have not looked like a preseason top 10 team, which obviously they were projected to be. The next team here is Ohio State. They started the year 2-0. They haven't lost a game. They're number 6, and they have an easy opportunity to prove me wrong. But this is supposed to be a defensive team, and their defense has struggled against Arizona State and Northern Illinois. It's not going to get any easier as they face off against Iowa next week on the road. And then as the year goes along, the schedule is really tough at the end with opponents like Penn State, Illinois, and Michigan to wrap things up. The Buckeyes are 2-0. They haven't lost a game. They very well could prove me wrong, but they have looked a little bit shaky. The last team we're going to talk about is BYU. I was not expecting the Cougars to be some team contending for the college football playoff, but I thought they would win 7 to 9 games this year. And I don't think they're going to win 7 to 9 games. They lost to FCS Midwest and then got clobbered by Houston. They don't have an overly hard schedule. They don't face off against any ranked opponents. But I have no reason to think this team's going to win 8 games. Let's talk about some more under-the-radar teams now who we didn't really talk about much today, but are going to be teams to really watch out for within future episodes who could make some noise. First off, we got Arizona. I'm very high on the Wildcats this upcoming season. They have a great dynamic duo with quarterback Kareem Kamara and senior wide receiver Scotty Piggins. I think these top teams in the Pac-12 like Arizona, Oregon, and Cal have a great opportunity to climb up boards quickly if they continue to win games. Arizona has a pretty easy schedule in the next episode before eventually going up against Cal after a bye week. I think Auburn could be a real dark horse contender for the college football playoff if they win that Cal game. Auburn is another team to watch. Unlike some of the other teams in the SEC, they had a pretty easy schedule today. The next episode, it gets tougher with games like Texas and Tennessee, and eventually Texas A&M and Oklahoma. I'm curious to see if this team can live up to the hype because I think they've got a really high ceiling. With all of those teams in the SEC killing each other, that gives opportunity for teams like Baylor to really rise up. Baylor has nobody in their schedule who's ranked. They do have a tough game next week against Fresno State. But if Baylor can, play to their strengths, they could legitimately win 11 games and have a real shot at the college football playoff. I think they're that good. North Carolina is another team to watch. They're currently ranked 7th, so they're not necessarily under the radar, but I think they could be really, really interesting. They only played one game today, which they scored 54 points in, and their schedule's really not that bad. They don't have to play against Florida State or Clemson, who I think are the 2 next best teams in the ACC along with them. They still have 3 other ranked opponents, but I think this UNC team could be a real dark horse to contend for the college football playoff. USC is another team to watch. They only won 1 game last year, and they've already won 2 this season. albeit it was against the only two teams projected to finish lower than them in the Big Ten in Northwestern and Maryland. But I'm high on the Trojans. I think their offense is special. They play against 3 ranked opponents in the next episode, and Nebraska's a very formidable team as well. So they really have an opportunity to prove me right as a team who can win 8 or 9 games this year and be a real sleeper in the Big Ten Conference. Let's take a look at the week 4 through 7 slate. We're going to go through 4 weeks in the next episode, and there are a lot of big-time games. Those SEC teams are going to continue to kill each other off, and we may see newer teams we may not have expected at the beginning of the season to rise up into college football playoff contention. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode. Let me know what you thought of the formatting of the video. Obviously, I've never done a video like this, so I'm going to continue to experiment with stuff until I find something that I enjoy and you guys like as well. Make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.